One of Them Days, starring Keke Palmer and SZA, is one of them January comedies. Okay, I can explain. Let's get into my review. What's going on, you guys? James here with another real review, and this is the first review of 2025. I'm so excited to get into my thoughts on One of Them Days. Thank you so much to TriStar Pictures for giving me the chance to watch this last week early for review. Now, the movie hits theaters, well, this weekend, January 17th, and it's rated R for everything. Literally everything in the book. The film is directed by Lamont, and this is his feature-length directorial debut, and the film is produced by, well, a lot of famous people, but one of them is notably Issa Rae, and it stars Keke Palmer, who plays Dreux, SZA, the artist SZA, who plays Alyssa, Joshua David Neal, who plays Keshawn, and Aziza Scott, who plays Bernice. Now, the film is exactly what you would expect from a buddy comedy with Keke Palmer and SZA, because it really just stars them as roommates. Dreux and Alyssa are trying to find money to pay for rent, or they're going to get evicted, so they go on this crazy adventure that leads them to shootouts, blood bank spills, and a lot of cameos. Yeah, Cat Williams is in this movie, if you haven't already heard. But the film itself, is it worth your time? I see a lot of different outlets calling this a classic. I'm starting to think we have to stop throwing that term around, because I do have thoughts. Now, let me not start off on a negative note, and let's get into my positives on One of Them Days. Again, this is a movie, it's a January movie and comedy. It's sometimes those two don't mix well, but there were some parts of the story that I thought had potential. You know, I do like the way the foundation was sort of set, because it sets up for a funny story. Even though the story was pretty predictable, I do like the concept of having two roommates, Dreux and Alyssa, literally just trying to find out how to pay rent, especially in this economy. It's tough. But, you know, do they find a way? You'll have to watch the movie to find out. I will say, though, some of these scenarios were funny. You know, there were moments where I was laughing at, most notably at the most funniest scene in the entire film. I literally did not expect any of it to happen, but it did. And again, stars another cameo. We have actress Kayla Monterosa. I'm trying to roll my R here. Mejia, who plays one of the teacher's assistants in Abbott Elementary, a show I absolutely love. And it is so cool to see how they sort of wove in what was really a pretty basic scene into something hilarious. It surrounds credit scores, money lending. It's hilarious. But that was where I thought the film thrived, in the simplicity of it all. Sometimes they go a little over the top, and I didn't love that, and we'll get into that later on. But for the most part, you know, I think if you're going into this with the expectation that it's a January comedy and it's not meant to be taken seriously, which I didn't, you might have some fun. I mean, there are instances too where Keke Palmer and SZA sort of, they elevate scenes, I would say. You know, SZA, you can really tell that it's her first time acting in a film, but Keke Palmer, she ain't new to this. She's been around for a while. So it is kind of cool to see them sort of work through the material together at times. And yeah, watching it with an audience, sometimes it can help, especially with the shock value in certain scenes. But I will be honest with you guys. One of Them Days, I've got like issues with it. It's not a perfect comedy. I didn't think it was going to be a perfect comedy, but I didn't also think it was a very effective comedy. And that's probably where my first negative we'll get started on. So yeah, let's just hop into the negatives. There were plenty of jokes that just didn't land in this movie, and I'm kind of surprised that they didn't have a better writer's room, knowing Issa Rae comes from the world of Insecure, where, man, they had some great writing in that show. But yeah, I just don't think that a lot of the humor here was effective. And for me, I always have this litmus test when I go and see a comedy that I know is going to be outrageous and really raunchy sometimes. Will the crowd in these advanced screenings, will the general audience cackle and laugh over the top with scenes that are probably like over-sexualized, which we get a lot of those here? They didn't really laugh. There were instances, of course, where the audience was laughing, but in the moments where you know the movie's telling you this is a huge scene, like this is supposed to be one of the best punchlines in the movie, our audience was very like, it was a popcorn effect, no pun intended, where some of the crowd laughed and a lot of the crowd didn't. So if the crowd's not laughing at those type of jokes, I mean, that doesn't bode well for the rest of the movie. Speaking of over-sexualized jokes, guys, I get it, low-hanging fruit. That can sometimes work in comedies, but it just didn't add anything. I mean, there are so many times where it was just like, oh, sex joke. Okay, like, we've heard it before. It wasn't funny then. It's not funny now. Or maybe you're someone who likes those jokes. You're going to get tired of seeing them here because they really dip into that well often. And I also had an issue with the acting at times because even with our leads, Keke Palmer and SZA, it felt like sometimes they were just reading the jokes rather than letting the comedy flow. Now, like I mentioned earlier, this is SZA's feature-length debut as an actress. So it's her first time in front of the camera in a feature-length movie. You can't expect her to be, like, firing on all cylinders, right? She had her moments, but for most of the time, I thought SZA, you could just tell it was her first time acting. Again, can't she get better? Of course, there's always room to grow, but it just didn't really fit here because you could tell Keke was like, yeah, I got this, you know, I've done this. But even with Keke Palmer, maybe it was more so the script for her character, but I don't know. Some scenes just felt forced, and I'm kind of growing to get tired of the shtick that Keke Palmer's characters in movies seem to have. I'm not saying she's being typecast here, but it seems like she is taking a lot of those roles now. So I do think that, you know, sometimes there's a tug and pull here where I was like, man, Keke's killing it in this scene, and then most scenes I'm like, we're used to this now. It didn't land for me and didn't really help the movie and its pacing, especially because it's like almost 2 hours long, so it's not great. I also found our supporting cast to be pretty lacking outside of, like I mentioned, a couple of cameos, but man, these characters played by Joshua Neal and Aziza Scott, those are the two that I feel like were sore thumbs. The moments where the film cuts to the B plot, which really is led by Joshua Neal and Aziza Scott, don't work for me. Those moments are really just jarring in terms of how it breaks up the momentum or any momentum that scenes led by Keke Palmer and SZA were building. I would prefer, honestly, that they didn't have as much of a role to play, even though I know the story needs to cater to those characters to build up to the finale, but it just felt so over the top for no reason to me, and it didn't really actually help with the movie itself. Like, their scenes were not funny. Like, I hate to say it. You know, Joshua Neal's character is supposed to be eye candy for the audience, and Aziza Scott is supposed to play this bully, you know, so everyone's scared of her. But it didn't really feel like it worked for me. And it just kind of felt like those characters were there just to try and get the audience to laugh again. They didn't add to the film. And that's a huge issue with me and some of these January comedies. But when it does come to the cameos themselves, I was actually shocked by the ineffective nature of at least one of them. And that's Cat Williams. I think Cat Williams is a hilarious comedian. I do think his interview with Shannon Sharpe was legendary, of course. But he, in this movie, I'm not saying he was there for just a paycheck. Maybe it was the writing for him again. But for the most part, he plays this character named Lucky, and I don't know. People are just sort of chuckling at first, and I'm not going to lie, our audience did not laugh afterwards after they first saw Cat Williams, because it's the realization, the shock of, oh my gosh, it's Cat Williams. And then after that, they're like, like his character, he's acting, he's trying to make people laugh, and unfortunately the audience, and me included, we were just not into it. So Cat Williams is kind of just here and there. I think he's here for mainly the name, but there were far better cameos in this movie. And like I mentioned, I don't care about runtime in films too much, but when it comes to a comedy and you're almost 2 hours long like this one, you better earn it. And they really didn't. There were a lot of scenes that could have been cut down or maybe even cut out, to be honest with you. But I do feel like the movie presented some good ideas that they didn't linger on, and then they presented other ideas that I didn't love that they stuck with. You know, I do like Dreux's character having a love interest here, but they sort of just like rushed to the end of that subplot instead of making that maybe a little bit more impactful throughout the film. So I don't know. The movie itself sort of didn't have too much of a direction, but again, it's a Lawrence. I'm sorry, I want to get his name right. Lawrence Lamont's first time directing a film, a feature-length film. So if that's the case, you know, again, he can grow as well, like SZA can grow in her acting, but I don't know. It didn't really click for me. So overall, you guys, one of them days. I think the first initial thought I had when I got out of the theater was I would have rather just watched Girls Trip again, a movie that I found to be incredibly hilarious. But this movie feels very much like, yeah, it deserves to be released in January. I do think it's going to unfortunately be forgettable. And I say unfortunately because I do like seeing films that really root themselves in humor based on location, if that makes sense. So maybe if you're living in LA, of course, we're still praying for everyone in Los Angeles affected by these wildfires. If you're living in LA, this will probably be a good comedic relief. It'll help you say, you know what, I definitely know what they're talking about here. Like, this is something that resonates with me, and I can understand that and I can respect that. I just don't think this movie works overall, and I think One of Them Days is really a weak entry into the filmography for Keke Palmer. So, do I think this movie will have legs? No. Will it maybe do better on streaming? I do. So when it goes on streaming, maybe give it a watch if you're interested in both of these leads. But otherwise, I think it's probably a skip this January. So One of Them Days probably gets... I did 1.5 stars as a joke, but maybe I will give it 1.5 stars. I'm between 1.5 and 2 stars. So this movie is, again, nothing special, nothing to write home about, but it has its moments. And I do think there were some potential story beats that could have been great, and they just didn't really execute properly on them. So there you have it, you guys. That's my real review and first impressions of One of Them Days. I hope you enjoyed this, and if you did, hit the big red button below, subscribe to the channel, tap on that bell, and hit that like button. And guys, if you don't want to miss out on anything else, trust me, you're going to want to turn those notifications on and get loud in the comments below and let me know which performance in One of Them Days was your favorite. Alrighty, y'all. Well, again, thanks so much for watching. God bless you guys, and I'll catch you at the next screening. I just hope Aziza Scott doesn't come for me.